All right, everybody, let's get started. Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, and welcome into the SCCU Daily Planet Theater for the Lunchtime Discovery Series. For this program, we meet interesting people doing interesting things out there in the worlds of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, art, nature, education, conservation, and more. We do a little bit of everything as part of this program. We take the opportunity to bring them into the globe here inside the museum or meet with them online sometimes too, so that they can share their expertise, insight with us, and maybe, just maybe, we can all learn something new and hear about some of the fantastic work that is going on most of the time right here in North Carolina. The Lunchtime Discovery Series is organized and coordinated by the Office of Environmental Education within the Department of Environmental Quality. They do the fantastic work of scouring the state, looking in every corner for these amazing people that are doing this great work, and then inviting them to come be a part of the program here inside the museum, where we have the tools and resources to be able to broadcast and share this program with people visiting the museum in the middle of the week, Wednesdays at 12 o'clock, but also anywhere in the world can tune in online on the museum's YouTube channel in order to watch. I think there's like 15,000 people tuned in right now. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But we always have great crowds, and it's great to see so many people always tuning in and ready for these programs. My name is Chris Smith. I work in education. I'm your host for the program, and that just means that I get the pleasure of first welcoming you into the museum and to the show, check, and then introducing our fine and fantastic speakers. Now, for today's Lunchtime Discovery Series, and in fact for the month of May, we are telling stories of resiliency, the ways that we can adapt to a changing planet. And for today's presentation, from also within the Department of Environmental Quality and the Division of Coastal Management, we have Mackenzie Todd, who is the
Resiliency Coordinator.
Thank you. The Coastal Resiliency Coordinator. I normally do a great job. I can remember it, and it totally left my brain today. Wow, said the host of the program. Everybody, please welcome Mackenzie to the stage.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Well, hey, good afternoon. My name's Mackenzie Todd. I'm the Coastal Resiliency Coordinator. I was mentioned with the Division of Coastal Management, and I'm located in the Morehead City office, so I get to live and work at the beach, which is a pleasure of mine. We also have Lynn Davis online, who is the town manager of Belhaven. She might give a little wave, but she will be speaking at the end of my presentation, and she is a participant of the program, and we just think that'd give a great perspective, so you're not just hearing from a state employee, you're hearing from someone that's actually participating. So the Resilient Coastal Communities Program is the first of its kind within North Carolina, and it's modeled after similar programs in other states. So my predecessors, when they were doing research for this program, we looked at the state of Massachusetts has a resilience program, Florida, Rhode Island, even Colorado, and we kind of tailored and piecemealed what they were doing and created a framework for what would work for North Carolina. So our program covers the 20 coastal CAMA counties, the Coastal Area Management Act, so it's just the 20 coastal counties and the local governments within them. And so to begin this process in 2016, our office piloted its first coastal resilience program called RENA, which stands for Resilience Evaluation and Needs Assessment. So within that, we worked with 5 communities, which included the town of Duck, Edenton, Hatteras Village, Oriental, and Pine Knoll Shores. And within this program, our office worked with those local governments to map community assets, engage with the public, identify some social and physical vulnerabilities, and then explored potential projects that could help mitigate some of the hazards that they were facing. So this process led to several positive outcomes, first including a more localized understanding of the impact of hazards on community assets, increased public engagement in the resilience planning process, and then additional data was created to assist these communities with grant funding. And then after Hurricane Florence in 2018, which I know a lot of us are familiar with, Governor Roy Cooper issued Executive Order 80, which called for the state's first climate risk assessment and resilience plan. So this led to a handful of coastal workshops that our office held that were designed to receive feedback directly from local governments on what their challenges were at increasing their resiliency. Was it funding? Was it capacity? Was it all the above? So we took the results of that, and then we applied for National Fish and Wildlife funding through their Emergency Coastal Resilience Fund, and we received approximately $1.1 million from them, and then an additional $830,000 from the General Assembly that we used as match. And that's how we began the RCCP. So our program overview, the RCCP takes a 4-phased approach. We provide financial and technical assistance to communities, especially those with low capacity, financial constraints, and socially vulnerable populations. As I mentioned, our area includes all municipalities and counties within the 20 coastal counties. And an interesting aspect of the program is that there are no matching requirements. So a community doesn't need to come up with any in-kind or cash match to participate. We also take the procurement burden off of our local governments for the planning phases, which I'll get into later in the presentation. But we've been told that this is it takes a big burden off the local governments that they don't have to go and procure a contractor to do this work. Our office will hire third-party contracting firms to come in and offer that technical assistance, and the community just has to participate. So our program objectives, the RCCP was established to support coastal communities in identifying and addressing their vulnerabilities to coastal hazards and climate change. So we first want to address the barriers to coastal resilience at the local level. We want to assist communities with the risk and vulnerability assessments. We want to help communities develop a portfolio of well-planned and prioritized projects. We want to advance those projects to shovel-ready status, which means that they're engineered and designed, they're permitted, and they're ready for funding and construction. And then finally, we help communities link up for other funding streams where these projects can get funded either through state funding sources, like through Division of Water Infrastructure, or even federal sources through FEMA's BRIC program or others. Thank you. So as I said, the program runs in 4 phases. So phases 1 and 2 run concurrently, and these are our planning phases. So this is where we contract with a technical service provider to provide the technical assistance involved in phases 1 and 2, which I'll touch on here in a little bit. But the main point of phases 1 and 2 is a community will participate in this 9 to 12-month planning process, and at the end, they receive a resilience strategy. And this strategy has 2 major components. The first is the vulnerability assessment report, and this details both the quantitative and qualitative elements of the assessments conducted. And then the second major part is the project portfolio. So this portfolio provides a set of specific project ideas specific to the community to address those hazards. And this is kind of like a living document where the communities can extract information from this portfolio and put it towards future grant applications. And they're able to kind of pinpoint back and say, we've been through this formal planning process, we identified these hazards, and this is a project that we think is going to help reduce our risk. And our latter phases, phases 3 and 4, this is where it gets really exciting. This is the engineering and design, and then our construction phases. So these occur, so communities have to finish phases 1 and 2, and then they can apply for phase 3 funding to get a project through engineering and design, preliminary plat plans. And then phase 4, when they're ready with their permits, they can get construction funding. So we have a program planning handbook that, with the help of Angela, DEQ Creative Services, helped us create. This is essentially we just made by staff, but it helps communities and contractors work through phases 1 and 2. So if for some reason a community can't participate in phases 1 and 2, this handbook is designed to help them kind of complete this work themselves. And an example of this is actually the city of New Bern created their own resilience plan, which made them eligible for phase 3 funding because they'd already been through a resilience planning process. This handbook can be found on our website, and there's also a really cool aspect to it where we have a technical appendix at the end where we're kind of breaking down the data sources for each step that I'll go into in a little bit. But communities can just go in and click on the latest data, such as NOAA's sea level rise viewer and anything that DEQ comes out with, and it's just right there at their fingertips. So this map is showing the participants that we have had so far. So we've had 41 communities participate in phases 1 and 2, and it's a pretty broad geography all the way up from Currituck County down to Brunswick County with Sunset and Ocean Isle Beach. We've had over 205 resilience projects prioritized. Over 400 people have been engaged in coastal resilience on the ground. We have 20 completed engineering and design projects, so that means there's 20 projects ready to be constructed as we speak. And then 3 of those have received funding from us and are complete. And I'll speak on those in just a few minutes. So this slide is showing, let's see, there we go, where we receive our funding. So as of right now, we have 2 major pots of funding. First is from the General Assembly, where we've received approximately $12.5 million since the start of the program in probably 2021. And we have been able to leverage approximately $2.95 million of that in state appropriations as match to bring in approximately $6.75 million in federal grant dollars through the National Fish and Wildlife's National Coastal Resilience Fund. And then just to give you an update, we just recently received our 4th National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant for right under $2 million to conduct a 3rd round of phases 1 and 2. And an interesting aspect of this one is we're beginning kind of a pilot project with this where we're going to start incorporating resiliency into communities' CAMA land use plans, which is kind of like a comprehensive plan. So starting to kind of take all of these different aspects and different plans and put them into one planning document, and starting to help communities think forward and think ahead in terms of zoning and development. So we will keep everyone posted on how that goes. We're hoping to start that process at the end of this summer, and it will last about 12 months. And I believe we have funding for 3 or 4 communities to receive those CAMA land use plan updates with the resiliency policies. And then we have requested funding for the program through the state legislature. So we're hoping we can get an additional $2 million in the next budget. So cross our fingers with that. So this slide kind of demonstrates where that pot of funding has been distributed. So as you can see, we've had 41 communities go through phases 1 and 2, so that has cost about $1.8 million. A majority of the money has gone to phase 3, which is that engineering and design, and that has come in at about $5.4 million for 35 projects. And then finally, phase 4, there's been 10 projects funded for $3.1 million. So these have been some kind of smaller scale construction projects, but still kind of moving that slide forward. And this is interesting because this shows that communities are somewhat moving from the planning phase, but they're stuck in this engineering and design where they have this project idea, and then there's a lot of grant opportunities that want you to have it fully designed, permitted, and ready to go, meaning shovel ready. And there's this in-between need in a lot of communities where they've needed this phase 3 to kind of take a year to do a feasibility study, do some metrics, do some design work, and really think that project out. So then when you get to construction, you're doing a well thought out project. So digging deep into phases 1 and 2, I kind of wanted to just break down, it's just a lot of words, so what's actually happening in these phases. So in phase 1, a community does kind of 6 different steps as they begin. So first, they're going to develop a community action team, which is essentially like a stakeholder engagement group. And this group can involve anyone in the community, from locality staff to elected officials to public health, safety officials, school board members, really anyone who's interested in moving resilience forward in the community. The second step is to review your existing plans and efforts, because we don't want to duplicate what's already been done. So we kind of ask that they sift through what they already have and kind of make check marks of what needs to be done next. So then that pushes them to set their visions and goals for the process. Where do they want to see the town or the county in the next 20 years? We then ask that they develop a community engagement strategy. Phase 1, they're required to have 2 community engagement events, and these have kind of differed over the years from contractors going out to a Christmas parade and some contractors meeting the community at a local brewery, just seeing where the community wants to talk about these types of issues. The 5th step is to map their critical assets and their natural infrastructure. So this can be anything from their roadways to the schools, their hospitals, their water and sewer lines, as well as their natural infrastructure, so any wetlands, marsh, parks, green open spaces. And then finally conducting that risk and vulnerability assessment. So looking at the flooding in the town, any storm surge, wind, erosion, things like that against those critical assets. So then they can get a visual sense of, well, this part of town is, going to see a really extreme amount of flooding in, the next 5 to 10 years. This is where we should focus our priorities for projects. So this is kind of an example of what I was just talking about. This is the town of Edenton, who just completed phases 1 and 2 of the RCCP. This is showing storm surge from just a Category 1 storm. So these are some of the hazards that communities are identifying and mapping, flooding being one of the major hazards, as we all know, storm surge being another one. We do ask that they look at sea level rise, at least a 30-year minimum projection. We have seen a lot of communities starting to look at wildfire, which has not been a requirement, but we have seen some of that with the town of Ahoskie. Some are looking at erosion, wind, and then extreme heat as well. So these are being mapped so then they can, properly plan for the future. And then this is showing an example of the town of Kitty Hawk. They just completed phases 1 and 2 as well. And Kitty Hawk is the first community to begin thinking and planning for marsh migration. This is not a requirement through the RCCP, but maybe we should think about it. So it's very interesting that they kind of took this on their own and started thinking about, the amount of wetlands and space and marsh that they have, and thinking, how are we going to address these issues? So that was a very interesting part of their final documentation. So once they go through all of that, they get to phase 2, which is the exciting part. This is where the community's like, all right, well, what are we going to do about it? So they develop the project portfolio. So they start identifying solutions with the help of their contractor that we have hired. And then they consolidate and prioritize those projects into at least 5 priority projects. And we do require one of those to be nature-based. So this is kind of an example of what it would look like. It may be hard to see, but this is from Elizabeth City, who also just completed phases 1 and 2. This is just kind of an explanation of one of their prioritized projects. So we ask that they do, obviously, the project title, a project description. We kind of need a map of the area. And then we ask them to put in the contractor scoping questions. So then the community can have that information when they go after other grant opportunities. So they can kind of, scope the project to what will fit that specific grant funder. Looking at what hazards this project will address, the type of solution, and then looking at the cost and the anticipated benefit. So this is just one of 5 that Elizabeth City was able to prioritize. And we did just end up funding Elizabeth City through phase 3 to update their Unified Development Ordinance to include an entire section for stormwater management. So that was one of their prioritized projects. So this is just showing kind of what phases 1 and 2 looks like when you're on the road. We have a small staff with the RCCP. It's myself and my colleague, Kaysen, who I couldn't do this job without, and then our fearless leader, Rachel Lovedrick. So we are usually on the road going to these meetings because we feel like it's important, even though we're a state agency and technically we are a regulatory agency, we want to be seen as partners and supportive of this process. So the top left has actually, when we went to the Christmas parade for the town of Creswell, and that is SWCA, their contractor, we got a ton of feedback there because there were already folks that were attending. We didn't, they weren't forced to come to a town hall meeting. And then the bottom right kind of shows that, at a meeting, we try to get hands-on. So, there's stickers to put on, I like this project, or I want this critical asset mapped. Just trying to get past planning fatigue, because I know a lot of communities are getting tired of the planning and ready to get to implementation. So speaking of that, planning to implementation. So the city of New Bern is one of our communities that received phase 3 and phase 4 funding, and they just completed their phase 4 project at the end of last year. So this just kind of breaks down that they received $45,000 for those engineered design plans, and this was a pretty small scale construction project coming in at about $175,000. So what happened here is it was the Duffy Field Community Resilience Project, which is a larger resilience project, and we funded kind of a smaller scale of that to keep that project moving forward. But the basin enhancements included constructing wetland features to treat and cleanse stormwater before discharge into the Jack Smith Creek wetlands. So this was a pretty cool small scale project to help with their stormwater flooding. So that was the wetland area that was created. Let's see, next. So the next example we have is the city of Washington. So their phase 4 project completed earlier this year. So this was Jack Creek's floodplain and greenway improvements. So this was kind of like a hybrid project. containing nature-based and infrastructure components that served a dual purpose as a public recreation area that had been kind of not poorly maintained, but just hadn't been cleaned up in a long time. So this project, the goal was to increase the storage capacity of the Jack Creek system, allowing the city to handle rainfall events at a higher frequency. And this picture was taken with a drone through the contractor, so they were able to send that to us. But we're gonna kind of keep going out to these phase 4 projects and kind of track how the plants are doing, and making sure that we're really building resilience long term and that these projects are working. Okay, so something else I wanted to briefly touch on is how are communities leveraging RCCP deliverables? So, once they finish phases 1 and 2, or even 3 and 4, what are they doing, outside of our program? So I just wanted to mention that we are supporting the town of Windsor, actually in a grant application to fund dam repairs at Hoggers Mill Pond, part of a broader resilience initiative. We've also got Bertie County used their resilience strategy to secure $125,000 from FEMA for a hydraulic monitoring study. Craven County received $200,000 from the Attorney General Environmental Enhancement Grant to build a living shoreline that was engineered and designed through our program. Hyde County received $400,000 through water infrastructure funding, DWI, that's within DEQ, to create a stormwater master plan and conceptual designs for Ocracoke Island. The town of Hertford was awarded $650,000 for improvements to Jenny's Gut drainage by the Golden Leaf Foundation. And the town completed their engineering and design study through us, so they received phase 3 funding and then received construction funding through Golden Leaf. And then finally, the town of Leland was awarded $950,000 through Transportation Infrastructure Resiliency through the Department of Public Safety to continue the resilience planning work that they completed through phases 1 and 2. So this is just kind of showing that the work doesn't just stop with the RCCP. A lot of these communities are moving this work forward, which is pretty exciting to see. So next I want to talk about relationship building. A key aspect of the RCCP is essentially relationship building. I can even just say that as we've got Lynn Davis online, who's a very busy town manager, and I called her and asked, can you please join me for this? It's just making these relationships and kind of showing up for each other has been my favorite part of this job. We're kind of working to provide capacity and resources to communities, kind of like community partners, not regulatory partners. And the RCCP staff we're very hands-on during the planning process, like I mentioned, and we try to attend as many community meetings as possible. This kind of helps us to understand a community's needs and reduce that planning fatigue. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a main focus of our program is the priority for communities with the lower capacity. So these are towns that have maybe just one town manager or one planning staff, may not have the budget for these types of projects, so they're the ones that we prioritize for phases 1 and 2 so they can kind of get this process started. And then the program, while we don't have reoccurring funds at the moment, we try to offer rounds of each phase as often as our funding allows. So this provides multiple entry points for communities, whether they're just starting or ready to implement shovel-ready projects. So an example of that most recently is we opened the application process for phases 1 through 4 for the first time. We usually either do 1 or 2 or 3 and 4. And we received many applications for phases 1 and 2, and then about 15 to 20 for phase 3 and about 5 for phase 4. So it kind of just helps where a community can kind of fit in, where kind of meeting them where they're at. So long-term impacts, we're providing these living documents that communities can continue to use, and it's not a plan that will sit on a shelf, just help secure additional funding and address ongoing hazards. We want to build for long-term progress, so the phased approach lets communities focus on foundational work, like the vulnerability assessments, and then provides a framework for grant applications. And then we support adaptive management at a regional scale. So as I said, we're helping with building regional resilience at the Hoggers Mill Pond Dam. And then lessons in collaboration. So the RCCP is growing and has been successful in bringing resilience resources to communities, especially those most in need. Our success has been rooted in a collaborative process between the consultants that we hire as well as the communities, emphasizing partnerships. So we have seen a council of government, it was the Mideast Commission, was partnered with RK&K, which is a planning and engineering firm. We kind of put them together like a blind date for the first round of phases 1 and 2 to work together. And then they've been working together ever since, just on their own. So we have seen kind of that partnership created, and then they're just kind of taking it from there. And then with the help of our contractors and our partners, we're hoping to give more of a voice to these unincorporated areas of coastal North Carolina, and hoping to enhance regional resilience efforts as well. So where is the RCCP right now? We have a lot going on. So as I said, phases 1 through 4, our applications were due April 25th, and so we're currently in the review process. When I get back to the office, that's probably essentially what I'll be doing most of the time. For phases 1 and 2, we did receive 23 applications from communities to participate, and 10 of those requesting to incorporate resiliency into their CAMA land use plan that I mentioned earlier. So we're gonna have to make some difficult decisions, but we're excited to see the amount of excitement and effort through the RCCP. And then we received 19 applications for contracting firms, 9 of them being completely new to the RCCP. So kind of wanting to get into this resilience game and help communities at the local level. We received 16 applications for phase 3, that's at engineering and design, for a total grant request amount of $3.5 million. And then for phase 4, we did receive 4 applications for a total grant request amount of $2.3 million. So we will be going through those applications and hopefully making awards over the summer, so stay tuned. There will be a press release, and that work should begin this fall. And then we also are hiring a new coastal resilience specialist, because we definitely need all the help we can get, and I believe she starts next week, so it'll be myself, her, and Kaysen on the road this fall, going to all these community meetings. And then finally, we are working with Dr. Miyuki Hino with UNC Chapel Hill. Her and her grad students are leading an external evaluation of our program, which we think is really important. Because if you ask me if there's anything wrong with the program, I'll say no. No, I'm just kidding. There's always room to improve. But so she's going to help us kind of identify areas for improvement and make sure that we're building this resiliency long term and that it's equitable to each of our communities on the coast. And then I think now we will switch over to Lynn. I'll just quickly introduce her. Talking about community champion, this is her right here. She's the town manager for the town of Belhaven, and they've been a community participant since 2021. And adding it up last night, Lynn, I realized you guys have received $848,000 in RCCP funding to improve the town's resiliency. So there was a phase 1 and 2, and then for phase 3, you guys have received funding for 2 separate projects, and then they're currently wrapping up their phase 4 construction project. So Lynn, if you're still on, I'll pass it to you.
I'm glad you had that total, because I was trying to do the math from memory.
Oh,
So
Lynn, you're muted.
That's good.
Oh, no?
No? Can you hear me? Hello?
There you are, Lynn. I can hear you. Go
Okay,
ahead.
good. Yeah, I'm glad you did that math for me, because I was trying to add it up from memory, and I knew it was right around the $800,000 mark, but I wasn't quite sure of the down to the penny. So the Resilient Coastal Communities program for our community, we are a coastal community. Belhaven, North Carolina. We're on the Intracoastal Waterway. We are surrounded on 3 sides by water. We're in the inner banks of North Carolina. And we also sit 2 feet above sea level. So we have challenges from a heavy rainstorm. Some joke that we have challenges from a heavy dew, but we are meeting that with all kinds of mitigation projects and programs, and have been for many years. The RCCP program has helped us truly work a plan. We did not have any resilient strategies in place until we started participating in the RCCP program. And from that, as Mackenzie said, we have now developed every plan that has been developed and every priority that was on our resilience strategy has been funded or has either been applied for. So we are really hopeful that the work that's being done through this program, through the professionals with the engineering firms, that we're actually going to be able to see the difference in our day-to-day life here in Belhaven. We have a phenomenon called sunny day flooding, and it's a beautiful sunny day out here, but if there's a system off of the coast, our water, our creek and river might be flat, but it pushes the water inland and it causes problems with some inland flooding in our neighborhoods. And one of the projects that we actually visited on Monday, and I had hoped to have aerial shots for you today, is the wetland project that we created in a park area. And the engineers were there, and so were the contractors, and they were so excited because they were able to see the project actually working. The wetlands were holding some of this high water and keeping it off of our roads and keeping it off, off of the yards and out of the yards and ditches of some of these neighborhoods that we were looking to focus on. So we are really excited about the opportunities for the projects that we've already implemented, and then the projects, the plans that we now have um, to address that sunny day flooding and to address some other issues around town. With the stormwater plan, we're working on that right now. We have applications out for some additional FEMA funding to do a pump and gate system, again, to work on the sunny day flooding issue. But all of this is possible and only possible through the RCCP program. We would not be where we are today without the assistance and the guidance and direction from DEQ, from the Mideast Commission, from RK&K. They have actually guided us through and walked us through, and it has been a wonderful partnership. And I believe we're going to see great benefits from it in Belhaven for years to come.
Awesome. Thank you, Lynn. I think if you're ready, we'll take some questions.
Well, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much. What an exciting and interesting program that you've got going on.
Yes.
The sheer number of applications and projects and communities that it's serving, I think, is really impressive. That DEQ, coastal management, that coastal resiliency is being able to marshal so many resources for these communities and provide expertise as well to help usher them through this program so that they can take advantage of all of these strategies that science tells us works really well for these communities, but it's just getting resources and making it possible for them to participate. So that's pretty wild. That's crazy stuff. I love that. If you're in the room with me and you've got questions you want to ask, you can just wave down at me if you're on the balconies, or wave at me if you're here on the first floor. I'll bring you a microphone if you're down here on the first floor. If you're up on the balconies, just wave down, and then I'll throw a microphone at you. No, I won't do that. You can yell down at me, and then we'll repeat your questions into the microphones. And if you're still watching online, you can post your questions in the chat. I have that pulled up so that we can field those as well. The first one for you is, are other states reaching out to you for advice?
That is a great question. No, it's usually the opposite. No. We did have South Carolina. They did reach out and interview us about the RCCP, and they did admit that they kind of copied our framework, but it's not copying because we're all learning from each other. And they took the RCCP framework and made it for South Carolina, and they're taking a watershed approach, which is really interesting. And I did speak to some of their staff a few months ago, and they said everything's still going well. Just funding is a little bit of a concern, but that's kind of everywhere. But they said that our handbook and our framework kind of is just really replicable for them, and that's how they were able to implement that in South Carolina. And then Massachusetts definitely has, they're kind of the OGs of this resilience planning process, so we sometimes still connect with them and see how we can continue to improve our program.
Fantastic stuff. What would you say are some of the, what's the right way? I don't want to say popular, I guess, most requested types of strategies or engineering and design projects that you see requests for overall?
So that's another good question. Since we do kind of focus on projects having at least, a small nature-based component. We are looking at a lot of living shorelines, any kind of stormwater management, floodplain restoration, or wetland creation. Those are some of the big ones. And they can be kind of smaller scale since we don't have, millions and millions of dollars to hand out. So a lot of these, like Lynn was saying, is some of these floodplain management issues and kind of starting there, or stormwater and, easement plans. But definitely a lot of living shorelines has been of recent.
Yeah, my next question was going to be about nature-based strategies particularly, and what communities are implementing the most. Was it living shorelines, or is it rain gardens and native pollinator plants, or floodplain restorations, stuff like that?
Yes, so we actually just funded the town of Burgaw through Phase 3 to create a rain garden near one of their municipal buildings. And I believe they just applied for Phase 4 funding to finally get that constructed. The town of Ocean Isle is currently in Phase 3 for a living shoreline in their community. And then Elizabeth City is looking to do a living shoreline. The town of Vandermeer, which is in Pamlico County. So it's very interesting to see all these different communities, but they're all learning from each other because, once one does it, they can go, oh, okay, well, that worked there. Let's see how it can work here. So we'll see how it goes.
So you do see communities sort of sharing notes
Oh, yes.
on which of these strategies work for them and maybe which ones don't? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of communities are going to be able to learn from Lynn with the town of Belhaven because, a lot of communities are facing similar issues to the town of Belhaven with the sunny day flooding and the stormwater issues and even just, tidally influenced flooding events. It's not new, and a lot of communities are dealing with that. So some of these communities like Belhaven and City of Washington are kind of the pioneers in this program that have made it to Phase 4. And so I think it's going to be really interesting to see how these projects, once they're done, how did it work, and we can kind of learn from each other and keep building that resilience.
Lynn, I'm curious if you could share with us a little bit more of course, there was the process of working with the RCCP, but what about the process of working with residents in Belhaven, the people who are experiencing things like sunny day flooding and want solutions to it? Yeah, I can't get two people to agree on what to have for dinner tonight. So I'm curious just how you work through that and then get these strategies implemented.
I had the advantage of being fairly new to the community when we started applying to this program. I started 3 weeks prior to Hurricane Florence inundating our town with 3 feet of water over a 48-hour period. So that was a crash course into resiliency and flood mitigation. So it became very apparent from an early point that everybody had an issue with flooding. It didn't matter if you lived on the waterfront or you lived 5 blocks in, that we had a problem, and anything we could do to address it was an improvement. Obviously we're not working fast enough for a lot of people, but being able to show those baby steps, that has probably been the challenge because people want it fixed now. But we were able to find minutes from town council meetings that were almost 30 years old, where the same issues that we're dealing with right now, that we're addressing through this funding and through these projects, were discussed at town council meetings 30 years ago. So this has been an ongoing thing, and I think we're finally able to, rather than just give it lip service, we're actually able to put some plans into place. So people see progress, and at this point, because everybody's been dealing with it, everybody in town deals with it, any progress is good progress.
I feel like that's the most important part is that when you get to that shovel-ready stage, that's when people really, that's when I'm guessing people really get behind these projects, is when they finally see something happening and how great it is for this program to be able to really advance the timeline along for communities. Seems important.
Exactly. And, as I mentioned, a lot of communities have this planning fatigue where they've talked about this, like Lynn said, for 30 years. They know communities know what their problems are. And, we didn't want to come in as a state agency and say that these are what your problems are. It's a very locally driven process. And, while this program can probably seem slow to some, our Phase 1 and 2 can take 9 to 12 months, and, Phases 3 and 4, sometimes a year or two. But as Lynn said, it's still moving forward. We're moving that needle just one step forward. So hopefully we can keep this going.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. I had two things. The first is it seems like in talking about planning fatigue, that maybe this has been successful in part because you've gone out and into the community and met them where they are. So that was just one thing I didn't know if you or Lynn wanted to reflect on, and as a different type of, as opposed to going to a hearing or, other kind of government meeting. And then the second thing was I love how you're including youth programming in some of these plans, and didn't know if either of you wanted to talk about that at all.
Sure. Lynn, I'll go first and I'll pass it to you. But so yes, there's a lot of interesting ways that communities and our contractors have kind of thought outside the box in terms of community engagement. And I will say that some of the communities where they have done a town hall meeting, it's not as successful, right? So that's where we've kind of encouraged our contractors to, people always say meet them where they are, but you have to actually apply that. So it means working weekends. Yeah, the Creswell Christmas Parade, I was out there, it was a Saturday. Do things that are outside of that 8 to 5 schedule. We had a meeting at a brewery. That's what that town, that's where they felt safe to come in and talk about these issues. And then we've also had contractors just come to something that's already planned, so it's just not another event the town has to come up with. So I think it was Holly Ridge has their beef festival every spring, so their contractor just came on the weekend, plopped a table down, and got a ton of survey feedback and actually got to talk with folks. So that's been very successful. And then the second question with youth, yes, that has been pretty interesting. I think we could do a lot better at that, though. We haven't gotten as involved with, K-12 or any of the schools, but I don't know, Lynn, I don't know if you guys have that maybe I'm missing.
No, we probably could improve that as well. To address that first question, we are a prime example of a low capacity community, and we have a total of 25 employees, so that's not a lot of people. And on any given day, I'm the fire chief, or I'm the electric utility director. So there's never a day that's the same around here. And one of the things that, to me, that I think is so successful about the program is that we had people reaching out to us from DEQ to say, this is a program you might want to know about, because I get 1,000 emails a day, and it's a lot of it is stuff that I have to filter through, and so oftentimes it's missed. But I think the success of this program is that people understood, the people who were a part of the planning process of making this work, knew that this program was going to be good for a number of communities, particularly those low capacity communities. So had it just been an email, oh, here's a chance of funding, I probably would have dismissed it. But the fact that there were people calling to say, hey, we have some help for you, you need to pay attention to this. That was huge in meeting us where we were.
Can you expand more on how community members play a role in implementing the plans?
That is a great question. So, that first part of step one is, developing that community action team. So there's an opportunity there for anyone in the community to join that kind of smaller stakeholder group where they meet one-on-one with the contractors and kind of talk about these issues and get all the way through the project portfolio. And then there's also the public engagement events where they can show up and voice their opinion there. And then I have seen some of these groups that come together for the RCCP continue to meet and implement this work after phases 1 and 2 is done. They've kind of called them resilience workforces, and it's kind of amazing to see what people can do when they come together and hold people accountable, right? And say, hey, we said that we were going to do this project. Here's some funding. Let's get after it. So it's been really very rewarding to see as an employee in the program.
Are there any plans for this to go statewide instead of just the 20 coastal counties?
That's a great question. It definitely could go statewide. It's a very replicable, framework. Where the RCCP, we have to stick within our jurisdiction in the 20 coastal counties. Anyone in the state could take this process and, do it in the mountains, do it statewide. I'm here to help if anyone wants to do that. I have lots of lessons learned and things like that, because I know I would like to see this, go statewide. There's lots of other communities besides the ones on the coast that need this kind of help.
What are some of your favorite favorite nature-based solutions? And is there a goal to push for more nature-based solutions to some of these problems than, say, digging culverts or putting in walls?
I think some of my favorite have been where it's a hybrid, because as much as I love nature-based solutions, sometimes it's not always the best solution for a community. We have prioritized them kind of just based on our funding from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. But I kind of like when a community gets creative about it. I think even Lynn with Belhaven, they've done this where they do kind of floodplain restoration and include plantings or, expand the wetland, but then they're also, cleaning out culverts or doing what they need to do to actually make sure the water gets out. Because I honestly think it's a mix of the two. Sometimes it's going to help with some of these issues. But as I said, I think the rain garden in Burgaw is going to be really cool to see. That's probably going to be in the next year. There's going to be a lot of living shorelines coming out. And then this is all still kind of new to coastal North Carolina. It's like, what is a nature-based solution? What does it look like? How does it work? So I think we're kind of dipping our toes in with some of these, but it'll be really interesting to see if a community comes out and says, I saw this in Virginia, let's try it, And so we're continually trying to update our handbook and update our guidance to help communities think broader in terms of nature-based solutions.
Lynn, how many more projects do you have on your docket for the RCCP?
So we have one that, Mackenzie, when you get back, just be sure to pull, flag the one that says Belhaven. So we do have another request in to do some additional planning work, like updating our stormwater ordinances and, making sure that we have the guidelines in place so that we're able to maintain and enforce those regulations. We have, I believe that we're going to have some additional projects that are identified from the stormwater study that we're having done right now. Just because, for years and years, we really haven't had any oversight of people filling in a ditch here or putting in a culvert there. So I believe that we're going to see some recommendations and some additional projects following this, the current projects that we're working on. But I will say that last week, and this kind of taps into the question you just had about hybrid projects, I was in a presentation and I heard the town of Duck talk about what they had done on Highway 12, and it's just an amazing project. And it was a combination of a nature-based solution and, some additional efforts. But in looking at that, I took some ideas away. So I've already started talking with our engineering team to see, hey, can we work this solution in? Can we do that? So we're going to continue trying to tap into every resource that's out there to create a more resilient community in Belhaven.
She's awesome.
That sounds right. Good luck on your applications. All right. Well, everybody, let's give Mackenzie and Lynn one more round of applause. You can express your appreciations in the chat on YouTube as well.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you all for sharing. Thanks for joining us from Belhaven. I was out. I had lunch at the Gingerbread Bakery not too long ago. Great spot.
It is
I'm a state
nice
employee. I
spot.
can't make endorsements, but you should try the corn fritters. They were great. And Mackenzie, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming out from the coast to Raleigh to be with us today. Thanks all of you for coming into the theater and joining us online from wherever you happen to be. We'll be back here again next Wednesday at noon with another program, so check out eenorthcarolina.org. That's the website for the Office of Environmental Education. You can get updates there on future programs just like this one. museum's website, naturalsciences.org, is also a great resource for you because we do this and a lot of other really fun and interesting stuff. And if you like this, you probably like a lot of what happens here at the Museum of Natural Sciences. So stay connected, stay plugged in. I hope we'll see you all again very soon. Bye, everybody.